And the serious point that I want to try and make is to try and get you to think about the future of these two children. And that is me in 1950 with my little knitted woolen doll. My Auntie Jean knitted that for me. And this is a child of today with its iPad. Now just imagine that you were a parent of this child in the 1950s, trying to imagine what life is going to be like for that little boy. And then as we go through time, and you'll see how the pace of change is accelerating, I want you to think about what life is going to be like for the coming generations and what we need to do, all of us, to try and build a good future for the children. Now in Leeds, I've only got a small audience, I'm going to risk trying this again. In Leeds, I mentioned this song, right? It was Doris Day. It was a big hit for Doris Day in 1956. And there's two reasons why I'm showing it on the screen. One is that I think it's quite remarkable that me, who maybe can't remember much about what happened yesterday, can still remember the words of a song from 1956. But the second thing is, the words of this song are really quite philosophical, because they're talking about the fact that we can't see the future, and that whatever will be, will be. Okay, so I'm going to sing it, and if you feel so inclined, please join in. Okay? When I was just a little boy, I asked my mother, what shall I be? Will I be handsome? Will I be rich? Here's what she said to me. Que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. The future's not ours to see. Que sera, sera, what will be, will be. Okay, some of you joined in. Thank you very much for those who did. So, if you were thinking about going back to 1950, my parents, my dad was a carpenter, joiner and undertaker. My mum was a school meal supervisor. But they wanted to shape the future for me, and they had a wish list, which is basically this. They wanted me to have the things that they didn't have when they were young, when they were growing up. They wanted me to have a professional career that used my brains, wanted me to have a job for life, and all these things were in the back of their mind, and they wanted to do everything they could. So they saved and gave me things, they sacrificed to give me opportunities in my life. So if they were looking about what sort of job they would like me to have, could be a doctor, professional teacher, or a bank manager, at the end, I'm going to review how closely my parents' wishes were achieved in all of these things. But the doctor is quite interesting because my dad had undertaking duties, so he made coffins, right? My uncle, who was my godfather, my Uncle Craig, he was a lay preacher, so he was able to marry people, and together, my uncle and my dad thought it would be a good idea if I could be a doctor and bring children into the world, so I could bring them into the world, my uncle could marry them, and my dad could send them off to another world. And the name for the company they got in mind was Hatch, Match and Dispatch, which I thought was pretty good at the time. Now, as a boy, I had my own dream job. And these are the characteristics of that dream job, which are really not very different from what my mum and dad had. I'm not going to tell you or ask you what my dream job was, but we'll come to that later in the presentation, and we'll see, how accurately my wishes were achieved and how accurately my parents' wishes were achieved. So, looking at the technologies that help my learning and development, now these are not technologies that were specifically designed for learning. My uncle was the first person in our street to have a car, and he had a Humber Snipe, like that, right? It was nicknamed the Bomb. And whenever we went anywhere, and in the summertime we usually go to Hunstanton, but at the weekends we would maybe drive to Skegness or somewhere local to where I lived in Boston. And my dad and my uncle used to do a mini service of the car. You know, they would clean the spark plugs, they would check the points, tyres, everything. And it didn't have electronic ignition, so it was a crank handle job to start the car. And despite all of the love and attention they gave this car, it broke down regularly. So wherever we went, and Skegness was quite a popular place, we used to salute all the places we broke down at. And there were quite a few of them. But from my learning development point of view, that car took me to experiences, new experiences that I learned from. And it was the same with the steam train. My grandfather was a railway man. You know, he was a gang foreman, and when my grandma and my granddad used to take me away on the weekends, and whenever we went past a signal box or set of signals or crossing gates, my granddad would say, I put those in, I service those. But again, the train was something that took me to places that I'd never been before and gave me new experiences. On the telecom side, part of my career was in telecommunications, but one of my experiences with one of those old phone boxes, you remember the ones with press button A? Yeah? When I was about 8 years old, I was at primary school, and normally I went to my grandma's for my lunch. But on this occasion, my grandma had to go into hospital, and I was supposed to go home, but I forgot. And so I was merrily walking to my grandma's, and then I realised that I was going in the wrong direction. But I hadn't got time to get home, so I decided to ring home. And we hadn't had a telephone very long. I still remember the number, something else I remember, Boston 4040. So I dialed the number, put my money in, and I'd given the wrong number. So I pressed button A and I lost my money. And my parents, my mum were going frantic because she didn't know where I was. And so I got hauled in front of the headmistress in the afternoon to get told off and not say anything to anybody. And the other learning technology was Encyclopedia Britannica. You know, our bookcase in our house was exactly like that. And my dad, I think, used to pay so much a week to the encyclopedia salesman. But the other technology I mentioned was steam trains, and I'll see if I can get this to play. Remember that sound? That is actually the sound of Oliver Cromwell. It was on the Great Central Railway when they had a steam dial a few days ago. But the other sound that you may remember from the past is this sound. Well, this one comes from Milton Keynes Museum. Remember that sound? The Strauger's electromechanical switch whenever you made a phone call and the rotary dial. Unlike the electronic exchange of today, you get a lot of noises. So, as I was growing up, most people didn't have television in those days. There was a big boom in television in 1953 when they had the coronation. We didn't get a television until after that, and our television looked like that. It was a little black and white thing. And we had a television repairman called Mr. Meller. And he used to come round and occasionally change a valve. And the words that we dreaded hearing when Mr. Meller came round were, "Your tube's gone," right? Because it was a cathode ray tube. But again, television was something that brought me new experiences. But the teacher who had most influence on me in primary school was Mrs. Derbyshire. So we used to sit in a circle at school on a Tuesday afternoon, and she'd read us stories from Biggles. So this is where I got my love of storytelling. So as time went by, I was very lucky, and well, it's very unusual that we had a teacher who taught Russian at my school. My school wasn't a particularly special school, but we had a Russian teacher, and in 1966 my parents saved up to send me on a school trip to Moscow and Leningrad. So I went by train through Europe, I went across the Berlin Wall, through East Germany, Poland, Russia, Moscow, 5 days in Moscow, in a hotel that literally was on Red Square. So I looked out over Lenin's mausoleum and St. Basil's Cathedral. I saw Lenin in his mausoleum, you can't see that today. Then we went to Leningrad, and then, as St. Petersburg now, and then we came back by boat through Helsinki and Copenhagen. So I was really too young to appreciate that. Now, looking back now, that was just an amazing experience. And I actually watched England win the World Cup in Leningrad on a black and white Russian television set. So I was fortunate to get a scholarship with Post Office Telecommunications, and so I went to Horwood House, which is not too far from here. It's a hotel now.
I've been drunk there more times than I care to remember.
Sorry?
So I've been drunk there more times than I care to remember.
I've been drunk there as well, but we won't go into that. I'll tell you some stories about Horwood House. But I also, in that time, came here to Bletchley Park. I did some of my training here. They were training people to go up telegraph poles, safety procedures and that kind of stuff. So I spent some time here when it was part of Post Office Telecommunications. And then in 1969, have you remember Stone, the training? Yeah. I was in Stone in one of those Nissin huts watching television when the moon landing was on in 1969. Watched it happen live. And when I went to university, it's my first taste of computing, and I learned to program in Fortran. And we used to write out the programs in hand, send them to the computer department, they would punch cards, and then a week later I'd get back a report saying fails to compile with some errors. And that would be about 1970, something like that. So, okay, it's a little while ago, but in history terms, it's just a blink of an eye, in terms of human history. But then, when I graduated, I became an executive engineer for Post Office Telecoms, and I won't go into the reasons, but I tried to work a promotion flanker, which led me to become a management tutor at Bexhill Management Training College. I was training first line supervisor, and that was my first experiment using learning technologies in this course. So we had a videotape player. So one of the skills that we were trying to teach first line supervisor were personal skills, body language, communication. So if you had to give somebody an appraisal interview or disciplinary interview, you needed to have the right kind of approach to get the result you wanted. So as an exercise, myself and one of the other tutors recorded ourselves doing a disciplinary interview and an appraisal interview and some other funny one. And we played it back and we deliberately did them wrong. So when we were doing the appraisal for somebody, we were looking bored, giving all the wrong body language signals, and when we were doing when we were doing the appraisal, we were really showing that, and then when we were doing disciplinary interview, we were relaxed and we were open, and we got the students to try and guess what the situation was simply from our body language. So that was my first experience with using immersive technologies. But then got disillusioned with the post office, so I decided that I really wanted my own business, and I could see telecoms and computing converging. So I thought, if I become a computer salesman, I will kill two birds with one stone. I'll learn how to sell, and I can also get some computing skills. So I joined IBM as a salesman, and this is the machine that we were selling when I first joined. The IBM System 32, size of a desk, display there, monochrome display with, I think it's about 40 characters and 8 lines. And the top of the range machine had 32K of memory and 27 megabyte of disk. we were selling those for £27,000. Yeah, back in 1979 that was. So if you think about the capacity of machines today, but when I left IBM, the machine that we were selling was a forerunner of the IBM PC with 64K memory and 2 floppy disk drives. My very first machine in 1984 was an IBM PC that looked exactly like that, with 64K memory. And then as time went by, Prestel and DoData came along with communication speeds of 1200 bits per second one way and 75 bits per second the other